Welcome to the Productpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Jalarzak, product development and marketing coach and mom of three. Learn from and get inspired by women entrepreneurs killing it in the product space. Each episode, we will share the latest trends, proven strategies, and inside secrets of the product world, all designed to give you greater confidence to create your own success through a product venture. Let's do this. Welcome to the Productpreneur Podcast. Have you ever wondered what's the right price for your product? How should you bring it to market? And what should be the strategy? Well, you are in for a treat today because we're going to talk all about pricing strategy. But before we dive in, let's hear a listener review. Nicole knows her stuff. If you have a product company, you will want to binge listen to this informative podcast that pours into you with so much inspiration and education. Nicole and her guests bring so much value and heart to every episode. I'm so grateful to have found this podcast. Well, that's from 3RIN5. Thank you so much, 3RIN5. I am really grateful that you found this podcast too, and so grateful for your very kind words. Now, if you are also thinking, I would love to be featured on the podcast, well, you too can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It takes only a second, and really, you are going to be helping other people find the show. It's super important to podcasts, so I can't say that enough, which is why I say it every episode. Hint, hint. All right, so leave a review and on with the show. Courtney Rogers is a pricing expert with a background in sales and marketing and has studied psychology and accounting as well. She helps female business owners establish a high perception of value, price profitably, and have the confidence they need to have a profitable and successful business. I am so excited to share this episode with you because pricing is one of those things that a lot of people find to be a mystery. They don't quite know how to price, and they could be leaving a lot of money on the table if they price too low, and also they could be turning a lot of people off if they price too high. So it is very important for your business. So I suggest you listen up to this episode and let's hear from the pricing expert herself. Welcome, Courtney. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Nicole. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. I am so excited to dive right into pricing because pricing is one of those things where people just don't know what to do. It's just like a mystery. What kind of price do I launch with? And how do I grow my business and raise my prices or lower my prices? It's all like a big mystery to a lot of people. So thank you for being on the show. Now, firstly, can you tell us about how you got to where you are? Like, I know you are in your own business helping people with pricing, but can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like most pricing professionals who you probably talk to, I kind of fell into pricing. I actually started, after I finished up some studies in accounting, I started a bookkeeping business. And I was looking for a niche because everyone says you need to find a niche, right? Mm-hmm. And most bookkeepers will look for a particular industry that they want to niche in. And I couldn't find one that I wanted to specifically focus on. And so I decided to focus on a business problem. And so I was one of those lurkers in, those groups on Facebook and LinkedIn and stuff, just kind of lurking in the background and looking at the kind of problems that people would post about and ask about. And I noticed that pricing came up quite a lot. And so a light bulb kind of went off in my head and I said, why don't I choose pricing as my niche? And the more and more I studied it and looked into it, the more I realized that pricing is actually its own field by right. And I just became fascinated with it. It was a perfect combination of, sciences, behavioral sciences. So the psychology I had studied, it integrated a lot into business as well on the numbers side of things. There are so many facets to pricing that just fascinates me. And it is so powerful for business. And so the more I studied it, I became a member of the Professional Pricing Society, which is an international organization for pricing professionals. And so, now at the moment, what I do mainly is helping female-led businesses, both small and medium size, to improve their pricing as well as their marketing overall. So as well as the pricing side of things, my firm actually specializes in pricing, but offers a range of marketing services as well. So we do marketing management, but I particularly focus on the pricing because that's where a lot of the power is at in terms of profitability for businesses.
Nice. I think that is so needed. And do you help mostly service-based or product-based or both? Does it not matter?
It's a really equal split. It really doesn't matter. Pricing, is more about the customers that you're serving rather than the actual product or service that you're selling, I've found.
Okay, got it. And so when they come to you, what do they typically say? Like, Courtney, I have no idea how to price my services, or what's their typical problem?
That's a common one. A lot of the time people will come and say, I want to make more money. I know I need to raise my prices, but I don't know how to. And oftentimes when people come, it may not be a pricing problem, maybe a value problem, which is basically the pricing is a symptom of that, right? So if you've got a product or a service that's absolutely fantastic, but you're not communicating the value of that product to your customers, then the price isn't going to make sense to them. So there you have a
Right.
value problem rather than a pricing problem.
Mhm.
So once you understand value and what it means and communicate it properly, then you can start to have really good pricing in your business.
Okay, actually, let's dive into that. What do you mean when you say value so people are on the same page?
A really easy definition of value is that value is what a customer is willing to pay for something. So this is going to differ, obviously customer per customer, because everyone values things differently. Value is subjective. It's also going to be different for newer customers who've never tried your product before versus customers who have, because the people who haven't tried your product yet, all they have to go on is perceived value, right? They don't know the real value of your product yet because they haven't bought it and used it. Whereas the people who have bought your product before, have used it, have experienced real value, they probably have a higher willingness to pay. And that's why it's generally easier to charge slightly higher prices for loyal customers or customers who've used your product before rather than new customers there. And there's a willingness to pay is a whole other thing to go into. But value is essentially that is what a person is willing to pay for a product.
Very cool. And then, so when you say pricing, what do you mean by pricing?
So when I say pricing, I mean what the value that you're able to capture, right? So let's say, for example, that your customer is willing to pay $100 for a product. If you can somehow find out their willingness to pay or approximately, you're capturing that value, right? And that's what pricing does. It's the capturing part of value.
Ah, got it. Okay, I've never heard it put in that way before. That's really cool. And so,
Yeah.
why would value be so important to setting your price?
Understanding value is the cornerstone of really, really good pricing. If you don't create, communicate, and capture the value, then you aren't going to have a profitable business. If you create a product and just slap a price on it and it's something that you wing, which does happen a lot of the time in business, a lot of the time pricing isn't given a second thought, you are far less likely to actually be capturing enough money or the money that your customers would be willing to pay. And so understanding value, understanding what your customers really value, what they really want, will help you make better decisions as well. Maybe the product you're making has features that you think are good, but maybe your target market doesn't find them as valuable, for example. Whereas if you really start to focus on value, start to understand who your customers are, what they really want, then you have really, really profitable information to use in your business, and you can start to make those better decisions. And then that then impacts your pricing as a result.
Cool. I love that. And so, yeah, the risk of undervaluing or underpricing, I guess, your product is that you're leaving money on
Yeah.
the table. But if you're
Mhm.
overpricing it, then you're basically not capturing enough people. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. You're losing money either way.
Right.
And so it's such an important thing to look at. I find that most businesses though will err on the underpricing side is
Hmm.
what I most commonly see. And it is a really big problem. And willingness to pay is not an exact science because you're talking about human brains, and human brains are also unique and different, but you can get a range. If you have really effectively identified your market segment, you can get a really close range and you can get as close as possible to that willingness to pay. And that's only going to benefit both your business and your customers as well when you understand what they value.
Oh, for sure. So, what would be your top tips to helping new businesses figure out their best pricing strategy when they're just starting out? They have no idea what their customers are willing to pay. Maybe they've done a
Yeah.
little bit of research, and
Mhm.
they've looked at their competition. In your mind, what do you think is the best strategy for them?
Oh gosh, there's like 100 things going through my mind, but I think the key things would be, figuring out who your market segment is. And this doesn't necessarily mean a particular demographic of people, like their age, gender, marital status, location, but figuring out, what's the problem that your product is solving, or what's the outcome that your product is promising. And then think of a group of people that have that problem in common. And that is your market segment. If you can identify that market segment based around a problem, you're going to have a far easier time in both finding them and also asking them the right questions. right? Because you'll be able to find out, do they know if there's other competition? Because even if you know there's competition, if they don't know that there's competition, that means they have a lower price sensitivity. And so your initial assumption might have been to price slightly lower because you know there's competition. But if your customers don't know that there's competition, you might be able to charge slightly more because they don't know that there's competition out there. And so there's just things like that. I would encourage people to look into questions like the Van Westendorp questions, which is 4 questions. It's very easy. Like anyone can put them in a survey. These are really good questions to find out kind of a range between where your customers would be willing to pay, but it also tells you the price at which your customer would say it's so cheap I wouldn't consider buying it because I'd question its quality, and a price where it's so expensive I wouldn't consider buying it. That's information that you really want to have, because if you don't have that information, you're basically shooting in the dark, right? And so I would just encourage people to, do that survey and ask people, what are the outcomes that you're wanting? What difference in your life do you want to see by using a product like this? Use very like future-based questions, using the Van Westendorp questions and really digging in to find out what your customers value. And also ask, rather than asking things like, what would you be willing to pay for this? Or would you be willing to pay X or Z? Ask questions like, what do you think other people would be willing to pay for a product that did blah or made this impact? Because what you'll find is that humans tend to think of ourselves as really rational people. We just assume that everyone else thinks like us. And so if you ask, what do you think other people would be willing to pay? You provide something the psychologists call cover. And so they're saying, I think other people would be willing to pay XYZ. What they're actually saying is what they'd be willing to pay, but they've got the cover of saying that other people would be willing to pay that. So you're more likely to get a more honest response if you phrase it that way. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do in a survey, but, even just 10 questions or something like that to the right group of people is going to give you information that will be invaluable to your business, not just in pricing, but your entire business as well.
Cool. We got to link to those questions in the show notes because those are really good questions. And especially when you're trying to find out the ranges, you're right. Like just to ask one question about pricing may not be specific enough. That's interesting when you say people tend to, you said the cover of answering for other people, because that's not typically in surveys. Like in surveys, we normally test for how do you like this concept or how do you like. So are you saying that like for any question, it's always best to ask in the sort of third person, what would somebody else, or more for price?
Yeah, I wouldn't put a blanket statement and say like always for any question in any survey. I find that for pricing, that one gets usually a more honest answer in pricing sort of questions.
Because there could be some shame there, right? Like I should probably say that I can pay for it, but maybe I can't.
Yeah. And you'll find a lot often too, because, humans are very loss averse and risk averse. And so oftentimes in pricing sort of questions, they'll give a more conservative answer anyway, because in the back of their mind, their lizard brain is going, I don't want to say too much because then they might charge that and then I'll have to pay it and I'll lose that money, right? And so it's perceived as a loss. And so oftentimes the answers will be very conservative anyway. And so by giving that cover, they're kind of putting the blame on someone else for that price that they suggest.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. And I love how you mentioned to, speak to your target audience and really get to know what competition is there, because if there's not a lot of competing products, you're right, they're not going to have a lot of choice. When they do launch a product, is it best to start lower or start at the higher range? And if no one pays for it, then lower your price, or vice versa?
It's always easier to lower your prices than to raise them, right? So if you come out and your price is so low and everybody buys it, right? Let's say your conversion rate is super, super high. Everyone buys it. It's very obvious that you're kind of leaving money on the table because everyone thinks it's a bargain. You're going to suddenly realize, oh man, I should have had a higher price. If you then go and try to make a higher price, people are going to feel gypped, people are going to be unhappy, and you'll have, a host of some problems there. Whereas if you do price it slightly higher and then you're having trouble getting those conversions, you're having trouble selling, if it's a pricing problem, again, it could be a value problem, could be a customer market segment problem. If that's the case, it is easier to then lower your price. And, and you can be transparent about that depending on your business and depending on your customers. You can be transparent and say, hey, you know what, we thought that this was a good price. We've listened to your feedback and this is going to be the new price from now on. It's going to be much easier to do that in the long run. The other thing to remember too is that the lower you make your price when you start, the longer it is going to take you for you to get to certain income levels in the future, right? Because you don't want to increase your prices too often and too much. And so the lower you start, the more often or the more you'll have to increase it to get to a certain point in the future, versus if you'd started a bit higher, then there's less of a gap between here and where you want to end up.
That's a great point. Yeah, I totally agree. Because if you start too low, then, there's really not much you can do and nowhere to go. And yeah, it's just harder to justify when you're raising prices and people are so used to buying low. So yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay. And when scaling your product business, would you recommend lowering your prices as, say, your costs go down in the future, or probably does it depend on the situation?
It really depends on the business itself. In some cases, let's say that you're trying to build a really high-end or luxury brand. I have a client like this at the moment, and, our prices are raising and will continue to raise, even if the costs went down, because one of the key indicators that we see in luxury brands is that in a lot of cases, the higher the price, the more likely people are to buy it. And we've been testing a lot of price increases in her business over the last year or so. And that's what we found. We found that the higher the price is for something, that the more sales that we've actually had. And so that's been really interesting. And that goes a lot too, because the kind of customers who buy from luxury brands want that prestige and want that exclusivity. And they want to feel, like the kind of power and authority that comes from being able to afford something really expensive. And there's nothing wrong with that, because like I said before, everyone values things differently. There is a customer for almost every business, right? And so, in terms of scaling, it really is up to the kind of customers that you have and what makes sense to them, right? If you're building a luxury brand, maybe increasing your prices over time makes sense to your customers and is something that they would actually prefer. If you are a software company, maybe finding ways to lower your prices over time, though, whether that's good for your business or not is another question. There's so many factors there. It really does depend on the business, where it's at. I would never set prices based on costs. So even if costs were going down, I wouldn't let that sort of influence pricing too much. I always say to people that your costs and competitors are like guardrails along the side of the road, and the road itself is value. And what you look at when you're driving is the thing that you tend to veer towards the most. And so, if you're looking at your costs all the time, you're always going to be pricing really close to your costs, which can be very dangerous for a business profit wise. And so instead, I would look at, what do your customers value? What is your customers willingness to pay, and trying to know that as well as you can, and pricing as close to that as you can.
Oh, I love that analogy of the guardrails and the road.
Yeah.
That's cool. I love that. And how can product businesses use promotional pricing to grow their business?
I think, again, I would just caution businesses who are thinking of using promotions, especially very often. There's nothing wrong if you want to set up something like an everyday low prices or high-low strategy. There's nothing wrong with that, but it needs to be consistent. I wouldn't recommend doing it in a last ditch effort or a desperate effort to get more sales in, especially if you're going to do it once or twice a year, because your customers will learn, right? They'll learn to expect that. You'll attract very different types of customers. Whenever you publish a price, you tell a story, right? And you need to be aware of the kind of story that you're telling your customers with your pricing. And if you run a promotion in order to just get more people in, you might get more people, but those people will be different from the people who are buying your products at full price. So you need to think about which kinds of customers you want to have long term. Now, there are certainly brands that have customers who are bargain shoppers, but they have those all the year round. They're very big multinational brands usually. They're very aware of their pricing. They're very aware of who their customer is and who their customer isn't. And so that's the advice that I would give, is get smart on the kind of customers you want and don't want, and use promotions really sparingly or wisely. And there's also a difference too between using promotions internally versus externally. So externally would be things like, putting it on your website that you've got a sale on. Doing it internally would be things like emailing everyone in your newsletter and saying that you've got a sale on, but not necessarily advertising it out on your website and social media and things like that. because at least then people in your newsletter or people who've bought from you before, like I said earlier, they know your value, right? They've proven that they believe in your value because they've bought at full price before. And so doing an internal promotion can be a way to not damage your pricing brand externally, and B, a way to reward, loyal customers who bought from you before. So it can be a win-win in that scenario as well.
For sure. I really agree with everything you said because, yeah, once you publish your sales and your pricing, then people come to expect it. And then look, and just they're just going to wait till the Black
You
Friday
just wait.
sale or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then you are dependent on it. And a lot of the greatest brands sometimes don't even discount. Like, you look at Apple, or can't think of any other brand except for Apple, but I'm sure there are, all the
I know.
luxury brands.
That's such a good example.
Oh, they're such a good example. Like they just don't, they don't go on discount. So you don't wait for it. You just buy your product that you want. And
Yep.
it's a great idea to just promote internally. I agree with that for sure. And also a lot of things I talk about with my clients is value-based promotions where you're offering extra value, but not discounting. So like,
Yes.
additional whatever it is, or gift with
Yeah.
purchase or whatever. That's also a good way to do it. And free shipping is another big one. So many or most consumers almost expect free shipping, or they really just don't like that extra shipping ticket. And so how can product businesses offer that free shipping or flat rate shipping while keeping their prices competitive?
So the short answer is to just add the shipping cost to your price and just list the price. That's a short answer. There's a lot of really interesting psychology that's going on in the whole shipping, extra shipping, free shipping debate, which is that because humans are loss averse, right? Whenever we see a price, it actually triggers a distress response in the brain, in like a very, very, lizard primal part of our brain. And this is because we don't know the value of things. And so when our brain is going into a buying situation, we look for symbols and we look for signals about what is going to happen, what we can expect, right? Because we also like certainty. We want to know what's going to happen because that's important for our survival, right? If we're uncertain about something, that could mean danger, okay, at a very, very basic level. And so our brain looks out for signals. One of the signals that we look out for is numbers, right? Or dollar signs or decimals or commas and things like that. Every time we see a price, it triggers the distress response in the brain. It goes, that's what we're going to lose. Right. At a very, very subconscious level, it's perceived as a loss. Now, like I said before, with pricing, it's all about what a customer is willing to pay. Now, if a customer is going to your website and they're looking for a very specific product, they have a very certain willingness to pay. Let's say that they have a high willingness to pay, just for the example of this. Their willingness to pay for that product is based on what they believe they're going to get out of that product. When they come to the checkout page and they see shipping, their willingness to pay for shipping on its own is very, very low because what they're there for is the product, right? Even though the shipping is going to bring them the product on its own, your customer's willingness to pay for shipping is very, very low, right? It's like, I'm not here to pay for your shipping costs. I'm here to buy a product for me. And so they see that not only as a loss, but a much higher loss because they have such a low willingness to pay for it. And it also triggers an additional distress response in the brain because it's another number on the screen. That's why it can be really hard for a customer then to continue with a buy if they reach the checkout page and find that there's a shipping cost. If you include it in the price of the product though, and you say, here's the price of the product, it includes free shipping, you're doing a few things there. Number one, you're halving the amount of distress response in the brain. That's a really, really good thing. You're increasing the likelihood of a buy. That's also a really good thing. By saying that you are giving them free shipping, you're also activating the reciprocity effect, which is something really, really cool in humans where, if you give someone to someone, they will kind of feel this obligation to give you something back. And it's very common across like everyone. And it activates that. It makes them more inclined to want to buy from you because it feels like you're gifting them something. And they're like, oh, that's really nice of them. I kind of feel like giving the business something back. And maybe they don't buy with you, but maybe they subscribe to your newsletter and you get their information or something else. They're more likely to do those sorts of actions and more likely to buy. And it is just an all-round much better, much more positive experience for the customer when you can include it in the price. So honestly, I tell everyone, include it in the price. Just have one price and say you get free shipping, even if you need to, if that cost isn't enough. And again, like I said before, I don't ever recommend pricing based on costs. Increase it a bit more then, or decrease it, based on what you believe is fair, and also based on your customer's willingness to pay. Because at the end of the day, your customer is coming to your website for that product, right? They're not coming there to pay your shipping costs. Your customers don't care about your costs. They really want the product. And so I always recommend that people include it in the actual product price.
Ooh, I love the way you just explained that because it's so true. Like free shipping is known to be the top promotional promotion basically that people choose. And I've never heard it phrased like that, like the whole psychology behind the free shipping and how it's an extra component and then the reciprocity of giving free shipping. Now, how about somebody who has like a $10 product item on their website and they, it's really hard to cover that extra. Say in Canada, it can be $15 for free shipping within Canada. So would you say in that case, well, they should be pricing it at $25, or do you think it's more
again, like they certainly can just add it in. I would be checking to make sure first, like, well, because if your customer's willing to pay for the product is $10, then it may not be a viable product. Maybe there's some value work that needs to be done there. If you need to spend $25 to sell a $10 product, that's not a very good business model or very sustainable. But if you've done your research and you know that your customer is fine to pay $25, I would absolutely add it in. But again, I would be balancing that against what you think your customers are willing to pay. Like if you do your research and then turns out your customers are willing to pay $40, all of a sudden you've got an extra, $15, $25 there on the table for you. And your customer is still happy because they've gotten the product that they value. So you certainly can just add them together, but I would also be taking that extra step and making sure, well, actually, what is our customer's willingness to pay, and checking. And that's important too, both in terms of whether you're leaving money on the table or if it's a viable product. If it is only going to sell for less, than it costs to make, then it's not going to be a viable business. So
right. Yeah. Okay, cool. And then international shipping is the other question. Like international shipping rates can be huge. Do you stop at that point? Do you go, okay, forget it?
Well,
not for international.
It depends on how many of your customers are international. If only 10% of your customers are international, then I wouldn't, because it's probably not going to be worth it to your business. But if more than half of your customers are international, I absolutely would. Right. I would work out what are the shipping costs that you usually incur, and then I would, factor that in. But I would always be making sure that I'm using some form of willingness to pay data in the pricing overall. But free international shipping is a really good call to make on a website. It's got a really good track record so far.
Okay, cool. This is so good. Thank you. And what are some common mistakes that entrepreneurs make when it comes to pricing? And what would you say to them?
I would say the two most common ones are just winging their pricing and just kind of pulling a number out of the air, which, you know what, it's okay. It's not the worst way to do things. Pulling a number out of the air, not giving pricing a second thought. And the advice I would give to that is really think about it. Think about your pricing as important, because it is your most powerful profit driver. It's the thing that is going to contribute to your business being able to last in the long run. And then the second one, which I see most commonly, especially for women in business, is they undervalue themselves, right? And they say things like, I can't raise my prices because I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm just a small business owner, or I just work from home. I had one of my clients late last year. She's over in the UK. She only works at home in her attic. She has a cat. She's an awesome, awesome lady. And she's, she'd always said like, oh, I'm just work at home in my attic. Like, I'm not that important. And she just landed a contract with Microsoft. So, and so, part of my mission for women is, telling them like, it doesn't matter if you don't have a degree, or you work from a tiny office, or you've only been at this a few years. It doesn't matter. What matters is the results that you can get for your customers, right? Your customers aren't going to be asking what the dimensions of your house are. They don't care about that. They care about the impact you can have on their life. They care about, how their life will be different because of work that you have done with them. That's what they're going to be looking for. That's what they're going to be asking about. And that's why they're paying you, right? And so that's one of the biggest things, is thinking that I can't charge too much because because of XYZ, I'm not good enough. That's the most common one. I'm not good enough. And I just tell people, you are absolutely good enough because of the results that you get. And if you can back it up with those results, you are absolutely worth really good prices. The prices should be fair, not just to your customer, but to you as well. And they're fair to you when they give you a business that's profitable, that has a really good chance of lasting long term, because that's going to give you more opportunity to serve more people as well. So yeah, that's something I'm really passionate about. I could talk about it for hours, but that is, the two most common things is like winging their pricing, not really thinking about it, and just undervaluing themselves.
I love that. I think we're going to leave on that note because that's so good, especially for female entrepreneurs. I hear that all the time. So thank you so much for sharing all of these tips. This is amazing. And can you just let us know how people can find you and connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I run a free Facebook group called The Pricing on the Cake. Very, very pleased with that title.
I love that name.
I also run it. Yeah. I also have a podcast by that name. But yeah, that Facebook group is where you can find me. I'm very active in there. Or if you want to get in contact with me directly, you can email me at courtney@courtneydeegan.com.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show. I think everyone's going to learn a lot.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you for listening to the Productpreneur Podcast. If you loved this episode, we'd be so grateful if you could take a sec to subscribe, share it, and review it on Apple Podcasts. Your review will help more women build their own dream product business. By the way, if you have any feedback, comments, or questions, email me at info@nicoledelarzac.com. Until next time, keep dreaming up those product ideas.